What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be giving my reaction and review of the second installment of Denis Villeneuve's sci-fi epic, Dune Part 2. And just so we're clear, this video will contain some mild spoilers, so if you haven't had a chance to see the movie yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time, let's get into it. Dune Part 2 is a 2024 American epic science fiction film co-produced and directed by Denis Villeneuve, who co-wrote the screenplay with Jon Spaihts. Now, the sequel to Dune 2021, it is the second part of a two-part adaptation of the 1965 novel Dune by Frank Herbert. And it follows Paul Atreides as he unites with the Fremen people of the desert planet Arrakis to wage war against House Harkonnen. Now, Timothée Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Josh Brolin, Stellan Skarsgård, Dave Bautista, Zendaya, Charlotte Rampling, and Javier Bardem all reprised their roles from the first film, with Austin Butler, Florence Pugh, Christopher Walken, and Lee Sado joining the ensemble cast. Now, development began after Legendary Entertainment acquired film and television rights for Dune in 2016. Villeneuve signed on as director of the film in 2017 with the intention of making a two-part adaptation of the novel due to its complexity. Now, production contracts were only secured for a first film, with the second film having to be greenlit based on the first film's success. And though Villeneuve was concerned about the sequel's certainty after the first film had a simultaneous theatrical and HBO Max release, Warner Bros. Pictures assured him that the sequel would happen if it performed well on the platform. And after critical and commercial success of the first film, Warner Bros. And Legendary greenlit Dune Part 2 in October of 2021. Most of the new cast members were announced in 2022, and principal photography took place in Budapest, Italy, Jordan, and Abu Dhabi later that same year. Now, Dune Part 2 had its world premiere at the Auditorio Nacional in Mexico on February 6 of 2024 and was released in the United States on March 1st of the same year. The film has been critically acclaimed, by critics and audience alike to this point, with many of them noting how it may be one of the greatest sequels in science fiction films of all time. And to kind of further that note, at the time of the making of this video, the movie has a rather impeccable 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, and that's based on 310 critic reviews. But it has a comparable audience score of 95%, and that's based on over 500 verified ratings. Now, it has a markedly lower, but still favorable Metascore of 79 on Metacritic, but that's only based on 61 critic reviews, with a higher user score of 8.8 based on 112 user ratings. And finally, it has a rather pristine 9.0 out of 10 on IMDb, and that's based on over 30,000 reviews. So that's a lot of reviews for a film to have a 9.0, even to this early stage in the game. Now, I'm going to admit to you guys that I have not read any of the Dune books. But that is typical and of no consequence, because I tell you guys all the time, this channel isn't about books. A lot of you guys will hit me up and go, well, read the book. Well, in the book this happens, in the book that happens. And I tell you guys all the time that this YouTube channel is not about books. It's about TV shows and it's about movies. And in these types of situations, these TV shows and movies are based on books. So I tell you, you buy the rights to the books and you go make your movie, but you don't have to do what they do in the books. And even to this particular case, there are some things that happen differently from what I understand in the books, in the film. So, I always tell people that it's not about the books. But in this particular case, the fact that I didn't read the Dune books is sort of relevant, because I'll also admit to you guys that I watched the first Dune movie thinking that it was one of two movies, because that's the information that I was working with at the time. But after having watched Part 2 to its conclusion, I went and did some more checking, and I now realize that Villeneuve has plans to make a third movie, which means that the first movie was essentially Act 1 of the story at large, at least in Villeneuve's imagination. which makes watching it completely differently. And that makes part two essentially act two, or the B story, the fun and games portion of the story. And I have to say, in that regard, the almost 3 hour film went down a lot easier than its predecessor did, for me personally. I will say, as a story choice, I didn't love that, Florence Pugh's Princess Irulan began the film, by narrating it. I didn't like being introduced to her character in that way. I thought it was kind of weird. But it's a small kind of nitpicky thing, not a huge deal. Now, the story, at large, does make use of the rather familiar trope in sci-fi cinema, that being a religious-like belief in a savior of some kind, or the one. It's in that way that Paul Atreides is reminiscent of characters like Anakin Skywalker, who, if you remember, was the chosen one in the Star Wars movie, aka the one who would bring balance to the Force. Or even Neo from The Matrix, who was simply referred to as the One. There appeared to be several time jumps during this story, with battle sequences, that came before the final fight playing like an extended montage of sorts, with character and world building scenes kind of sandwiched in between them, with the time apparently that passes from the beginning of part one to the end of part two being approximately 1 year, give or take. And I thought Villeneuve transitioned from scene to scene with a smoothness throughout the film that made such a choice work, even with the movie's extended runtime, because I got to tell you, this doesn't always work. And it kind of feels like at a certain point, the movie just hits a fast forward and you just kind of, really rush through some of this stuff, and it kind of can be disjointing, but I think it worked really well in this particular case. Now, there was a lot more action in this part of the story, which I think made the film more palatable, again, with it being almost 3 hours long. Lots of fighting and action sequences, none more bananas than the Fremen riding the giant sandworms. As I watched those particular scenes, I found myself asking the question, well, what if the worms simply dive back under the sand with the people riding on them? Like, wouldn't that kill them? But amazingly, the worms always stayed above ground whenever there were people on top of them, even though they almost exclusively traveled underground when there weren't. But I don't know. Do with that what you will. Now, the preface of this particular story is that House Atreides and House Harkonnen seem to be entangled in a blood feud that stems from the Battle of Corrin some 10,000 years ago. And, until the end of part two, it lasts until the end of part two, rather, when Gurney Halleck kills Beast Rabin in battle, and Paul kills Baron Harkonnen, and then moments later, Fade Roth in ritual combat, resulting in the annihilation of the Harkonnens, once and for all. Now, this film does have a twist, which a lot of these stories do, and here it's that House Harkonnen has managed to keep its bloodline alive, despite this blood feud, and a lot of Harkonnens being killed throughout the blood feud. They've been able to keep their bloodline alive indirectly through the Bene Gesserit breeding program. And it's because of that particular program that Baron Harkonnen, we find out, is the illegitimate father of Lady Jessica, making him Paul and the unborn Aaliyah Atreides' grandfather, which also makes Fade Rotha, the cousin of Paul Atreides. And this does something to kind of up the ante a bit as we approach the inevitable confrontation between the two families. Now, overall, I give this film an 85%, or an 8.5 if you're thinking IMDb score. This film, again, felt certainly more action-packed, which makes sense as, like I said before, this film basically functioned as the B-story of the story as a whole, as it's imagined in Villeneuve's mind. And I'll say again, as I did in my previous video, that I think this film had every advantage when it comes to the elements that make a film successful, including a budget that it turns out was increased from that of the first film by $25 million. So, even, the people who financed the film just kind of knew they probably had a successful movie on their hands. And, again, saying all of that, there are still a handful of science fiction movies that I would put ahead of this one. But I am officially in on this story at this point, and right now I do find myself looking forward to a third movie, so long as it is the last one. But what do you guys think? Have you seen Dune Part 2 yet? If you have, what did you think? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you who might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. Also, be sure to go and check out themaskscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write, and I'll catch y'all in the next video.